Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, July 1st, 2022, and we are months away from the November midterm elections for this election year, in which the Senate is up for grabs for the Democrats and the Republicans in one of the most hotly contested years in a very unfortunate year for the Democratic Party that has just been completely changed by the United States Supreme Court and their ruling on Roe versus Wade, a 50-year-long precedent that has now been overturned by the Dobbs decision. Now, the reason why I mention that as the main topic of this video is because this is the first Senate election projection that I have released or will be releasing following the Dobbs decision. It's something that I never expected to see a year ago come out of the United States Supreme Court. It was never something that I had in consideration and wasn't really a possibility up until Amy Coney Barrett ended up on the court, and despite the testimonies and the comments made under oath saying that Roe v. Wade would be upheld, I never really thought, at least, that it would be within consideration that Roe v. Wade was overturned, and now that it is, you are seeing a national uproar across the country that seems to have at least slightly benefited the Democratic Party. So that is definitely going to be a very big topic of discussion for today's video. The midterm elections really can't be changed by much except for mainstream issues such as abortion, inflation, gas prices, whatever you want to talk about that has already been associated with President Biden has already been in play, thus leading the Republican Party to a very likely victory in the House of Representatives. But I can't say that it has impacted the Senate as much as the GOP would have liked. And looking at our final map here, I already know what it's going to look like. I can't imagine that it's going to be extremely beneficial to the Republican Party, at least from where it might have been 6-7 months ago, just being entirely transparent. We'll start off this map by characterizing, sorry about that, I just messed up my microphone, by characterizing all of the safe Democratic states and the safe Republican states. These are states where we know who is going to win straight off the bat, regardless of who might be contesting them, simply because of the partisanship of these states. For example, New York, so overwhelmingly Democratic, no Republican is going to win it in 2022, especially not in a Senate election that has severe national implications for the Democratic Party. Same thing goes for the Democrats. For instance, Idaho, North and South Dakota holding Senate elections, the Democrats never going to win them. Republicans in a very solid position. They know they're going to win, don't even really need to contest it. It's a solid hold nearly every single time. Moving over to Kansas, Oklahoma special, safe red. Alaska, some people look at this and say Lisa Murkowski is vulnerable, but she's vulnerable by who? A Republican. That Senate race is going to end up with two Republicans ending up in the runoff position, and thus the Republicans are going to win the seat regardless. It doesn't matter who that incumbent is, Republicans will still be able to have that in their caucus. Utah, Mike Lee is running against an independent. Some Democrats, some independents hopeful in Utah that Evan McConnell might be able to unseat Mike Lee. Realistically, it isn't going to happen. We're going to keep it a safe red. Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Kentucky, Iowa, Indiana, all safe red seats. Missouri, keep an eye on it. Eric Greitens is the wrong GOP candidate, I think, for voters there, but could also very well win. The national environment is not feasible for a Democratic victory in Missouri. Maybe if this was 2018 and Eric Greitens was running against Claire McCaskill, but for 2022, Greitens definitely has a very good shot at winning that election, even if he is the nominee, despite being possibly one of the more unelectable Republicans, but all of the Republicans in Missouri are, in a sense, electable, especially this year. Alabama safe red, South Carolina is safe red, so now we're moving forward into the 10 remaining toss-up or competitive states. These are the same 10 that we have routinely characterized for the past year and a half now. Looking at the map dating all the way back to December 2020, I mean, we have been working with practically the same exact swing states as before. And the reason why I also think that is just something that I would like to point out as interesting is because back during the 2020 Senate elections, we found many more states to be competitive, even ones that originally were never even within the realm of possibility at being competitive. For instance, the state of South Carolina was heavily targeted by the Democratic Party. By the end of it, it ended up being a Lindsey Graham victory by about 10 points, but the fact that it got within and this close of a margin with a Republican incumbent was something the Democratic Party had at least fought for and wanted to see across the state. Then you have the state of Kansas, Roger Marshall, Barbara Bollier. These two ran against each other. Nobody thought this race could even be remotely within 15 points. It was meant to be very solid for the GOP, and arguably it was a very good pickup or a very good maintaining of the seat, but it wasn't as safe as otherwise would have been thought, simply because Democrats vied for a seat that was never competitive before that they thought they might be able to target. When Steve Bullock announced that he would be running for Senate, they also targeted the state of Montana. Sure, they lost it by 10 points, but Trump won the state by 16. Steve Bullock was the incumbent Democratic governor. Democrats thought they might have a chance. 2020 clearly wasn't their year, but they still fought for it anyway. And then you had the stereotypical swing states: Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Georgia twice, North Carolina, Michigan, Minnesota. These are states where Democrats ran their best candidates, and in some states came up short due to scandals or just simply coming up short due to the partisanship of some states. But by the end of it, they ended up winning control of the U.S. Senate and are now fighting to maintain control. And it's all within very similar and very reminiscent boundaries within these state borders, because there are no real shock races. There are no real out of the ordinary competitive races. Even this map back in 2016 had them. Indiana was decided by 10 points. Donald Trump won by 19 on the same ballot. Missouri was decided by 3 points. Donald Trump won by 17 on the same ballot. What we found was that some of these states were more competitive than previously thought, more competitive than maybe you would think about now. But that was because of strong Democratic candidates and a reminiscent voting group that previously voted for Democrats in some of these exact seats that don't vote for Democrats anymore. Our country has become so much more polarized since 2016 moving forward, and it's become very difficult to see or imagine how Democrats or Republicans can win in any of the states we've already characterized thus far if they aren't winning already. So now we can jump into these final 10 seats. We're going to get the easy ones right out of the way. Ohio, Florida, likely red seats. Colorado, likely blue seat. We're only going to really be talking about the remaining 7. Florida has Marco Rubio. It's very obvious that Rubio is going to win even with the Dobbs decision. Realistically, Florida never really should be outside of the likely Republican column. That's just simply how it is. Rubio won by 8 back in 2016, despite President Trump only winning the state by 1. Looking at the 538 expectation too, you're talking about an expected 12-point margin of victory, a very substantial one for the GOP in Florida, to say the least. Moving over to the state of Ohio, J.D. Vance is running against Tim Ryan. I think Tim Ryan is a strong Democratic candidate, but this simply is not his year. As I said previously, Biden is doing horrible. And when I say horrible, I mean horrible. He is doing worse than where President Trump was 4 years ago today. And when you take a look at the generic congressional vote, it might not necessarily reflect that, but if anything, Republicans are up nationwide. Biden is down 19 points according to Real Clear Politics. Biden is down 17 points according to 538. No matter how you cut this, Joe Biden is doing bad nationwide. Democrats aren't doing as bad, but they're certainly not doing as well as they were in 2018 or 2020, or quite frankly, even in 2016 when it came down to generic ballot polling. Of course, polling can be incorrect. It has been incorrect historically speaking, but sometimes it's right on the money. And typically, those are midterm election years. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the 2022 data, but it tells you that if Republicans are ahead, Democrats definitely have no shot in a likely red state from 2020, or even potentially a lean red state from 2020. Then you have the state of Colorado, in which we have Michael Bennet, the incumbent Democrat. He's not necessarily running against some more extreme Republican, but he is running against a Republican regardless, one that isn't necessarily well-known, popular, electable across the state of Colorado. Some Republicans have looked to Colorado as this potential dark horse race, and they might be right, because me invalidating it and the electability of that Republican there would in turn make this a dark horse race by the end of it, should it have turned red. But I don't see really where this idea is coming from. I get the Colorado Republican Party nominated moderates, but at the end of the day, Colorado is still Colorado. When Republicans won Virginia through every means necessary, pushing away President Trump, embracing a more moderate ideology, what we found was that swing was about 12 percentage points. Even if you swing Colorado by 12 points relative to where it was back in 2020, it's still a blue state. I don't think people really take a look at the electoral history and understand just how Democratic Colorado is at this point. I could definitely imagine Republicans winning the majority of the House seats there looking at their new House map, but the Senate seat is a lot more difficult. And you're also talking about an incumbent Democratic senator. They just ousted a Republican one 2 years ago in the state. So I definitely take that in consideration as I was looking ahead to 2022 in the state of Colorado, if there are any disagreements on my characterization. In these remaining 7 toss-up races, these are going to likely be the most competitive races of the election cycle. To remind you, Democrats and Republicans are tied in the U.S. Senate, meaning that one singular seat really could change the trajectory of our nation as we know it. Democrats could be more successful if they maintain the majority. They could be less successful if Republicans get it. If Democrats barely win the majority, it means they're back to where they were pre-Roe v. Wade, pre the expectation that the filibuster is abolished and made carved out by President Biden, by Senate Democrats, whatever it might be. What we find in the U.S. Senate is that if the Democratic Party does not win control of the Senate in a more expansive version than what they have right now, they probably won't have progress. But it's better than having the Republicans in the majority in their eyes. So these 7 races will be super, super important. To start, we'll start off with some states on the East Coast, because normally we go West Coast to East Coast. So let's go ahead and start off on the East Coast. We have the state of New Hampshire, where I'm really not tempted at all to change my characterization, at least in favor of the GOP. Looking at the state of New Hampshire, I've been pretty consistent about it. The last time I had it in the Republican column was probably back in December, or even maybe, December 2021. And the reason for that was following a decision from, not a decision, but following the election of Glenn Youngkin to the Virginia governorship that really turned my understanding and idea about the race. Even back in August, I had New Hampshire as blue, but once it became clear that Biden's approval rating was dipping, I immediately assumed that that would automatically turn into the Republican Party doing very well in many of these Senate seats. And in any other midterm election year, that would absolutely be correct. Right now, Biden is down 19 points. He is down 19 points when Obama in 2010 was down just 5 nationwide. 2014, Obama was down just 13. And I say just because look at where Biden is right now. But based off of the election results then and what we expect and probably will see for 2022, Democrats seem to have a cakewalk with this election, at least in terms of retaining their seats. And I think that is true in the state of New Hampshire. They have lucked out, the Democrats being they, have lucked out in the Republican Party's inability to field the right candidates or the strongest candidates in many of these races. And New Hampshire is absolutely one of those. So for right now, I characterize New Hampshire as a lean Democratic state. I think Maggie Hassan will be reelected, and so do many other people. So that brings the Democratic Party to 47. The next state I'm going to characterize is the most eastward state right now, and that is the state of North Carolina. I believe that Representative Ted Budd will be able to win this race by a lean margin. I am tempted to make it likely, and I say I'm tempted to make it likely simply because of the fact that this state has shown us consistently in the election data that Ted Budd has a moderate lead over Sherry Beasley. It's not a lead of 8-9 points, but it is a lead of 4 or 5 points. Lean is really not doing it the best justice right now. In fact, actually, I'll move over it into likely red. I've had some deliberations internally about whether or not I should characterize North Carolina as lean or likely. Looking back at 2016, I see that it was likely red, but also there was an incumbent, and it also was a year in which Republicans were winning the generic ballot across North Carolina by a pretty substantial amount. I don't know if that's going to happen again in 2022. There's going to be a heightened need for the Democratic Party to turn out knowing these new House districts. In addition to the fact that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. I can't say that I think pro-choice beliefs in North Carolina are necessarily extremely popular, but it definitely is within the majority. And I don't think that voters are solely going to vote on Roe v. Wade, but I do think Ted Budd is also a strong candidate for the GOP. I knew he was the right one. Sherry Beasley might have been a good candidate for the Democratic Party, but similar to Tim Ryan, just not the right election year. She lost in 2020, but only barely. She outperformed President Biden, but even outperforming President Biden at this point isn't enough in a state that is already historically red and has voted for Republicans in the past few elections. So North Carolina bumps up the GOP to 48 seats. The Democrats remain at 47. The next state I'm going to characterize is the state of Pennsylvania. I believe that the Democratic Party will win Pennsylvania. I think John Fetterman will be the next senator from the state. Dr. Oz is an interesting choice for the GOP. As I said previously, they have struggled to field the right candidates, and Pennsylvania is definitely not an exception. Right now, FiveThirtyEight gives Dr. Oz about a 49% chance of victory according to the Deluxe model. When you head over to Classic, that drops to about a 36% chance, and when you go to Light, that drops to about a 24% chance in the state. But Deluxe is what I'd go by. It's a very close race. I don't doubt that. I think it will be exceptionally close. But I also think that John Fetterman is the more electable and stronger candidate across the state. Looking at the state of Pennsylvania right now, I am not so confident that the Democratic Party is going to lose, especially knowing who they have nominated and who the Republicans have. They had a fractured Republican Party, one that went on for weeks following its conclusion. And the reason for that was because of how close it was and how contested the Republicans were willing to go about through this primary to at least count all of the ballots, even though it seemed to be there was a clear winner. Dave McCormick and Dr. Oz fought off in this primary for a very long period of time, and I can't say that it has helped Dr. Oz really in any way. If anything, it's hurt his image amongst the Republican Party. All the polls so far and all the data that we've seen shows Dr. Oz in the negatives when it comes down to approval rating and general election performance. And I can't say I'm willing to go against that, knowing the state of Pennsylvania's 2020 election history, 2018 election history, and even 2016, where they barely re-elected Senator Pat Toomey. It's interesting, to say the least. I think Pennsylvania is comfortable in the lean Democratic column at this point. The next state I'm going to characterize is actually the state of Georgia. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Georgia on my map hasn't been a non-Republican state in quite some time. The last time I had the Democrats winning in Georgia was in August of 2021. But right now, based off of what I have seen from the state, in nearly every single poll, in nearly every single Republican internal, Democrat internal, nonpartisan number, I have seen the Democrats ahead. In addition to that, there seems to be a severe underperformance for Herschel Walker in this race compared to Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp seems to be doing well in the state of Georgia. Herschel Walker does not. I also see this more as something that has really been adding up as a result of the scandals that have been piling up against Herschel Walker every single month. Something new about one of his sons, another son uncovered, a third son uncovered. I mean, these things don't play well into the Walker campaign, and he's not exactly this tried and tested candidate as some people might think. Sure, he's a recognizable name, but in terms of electoral and governing experience, I can't say that it would be easy for me to imagine him beating a well-respected and a well-liked senator. Warnock is popular. When Warnock replaced Loeffler, he was doing so when Loeffler was unpopular, and he still barely did it. But he was able to do it, much better than Joe Biden was able to defeat Donald Trump in the state of Georgia in a runoff election. I am impressed by the ability for Reverend Warnock to win in that state. And I think it will carry over into a slight victory in 2022, even if that means the governorship goes to Brian Kemp. I think both things are very, very possible. Right now, I think Georgia is a tilt Democratic state. I haven't said that since August of 2021. I don't necessarily think it's just a decision following Roe v. Wade being overturned. I think it comes to really just this ultimate idea and understanding about where Georgia is right now, where Herschel Walker is right now, where Raphael Warnock is right now, and where the numbers lie. Because all of it is indicating that this will be a narrow Warnock victory. But good news for Republicans, we head over next to the state of Wisconsin that I will characterize as lean red. I really haven't wavered much from this. On one hand, I've had it as tilt red. On the other hand, I've had it as lean red. Similar to the state of Georgia, I haven't had Wisconsin as blue since August of 2021. And this was when Biden was really dipping down and lessening his approval rating across these states and lessening his approval rating across the nation. By the next Senate election projection, I had Republicans in the advantage. And this was the first time I had done a Senate election projection when Biden was unpopular nationwide. He might still be unpopular, and that lean Republican characterization will remain the same in the state of Wisconsin. But I think Wisconsin right now has reelected Ron Johnson, historically speaking, in unfavorable situations for his approval, but beneficial ones on the national average. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen again in 2022, and I don't necessarily know if the Democratic Party is going to do well in the state. We haven't really seen a perfect indication the Democrats are the favorites to win, and I agree with this characterization, and have agreed for the past couple of months now. Wisconsin, I would leave in the lean Republican column. And then in the final two states, we have Nevada and Arizona. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Nevada, in my more recent maps, has been a pretty good state for the Democratic Party, though it has gone to Republicans as recently as May 3rd. I'm going to return it back to the GOP. I think they will narrowly win in the state of Nevada. Seeing a lot more data come out from the state tells me that this race is much closer than otherwise thought. Closer than potentially Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Nevada could in fact be the closest Senate race of this election cycle. And I know that may seem as something that is unexpected or out of the ordinary, but I think it's factual. Cortez Masto has been barely leading Adam Laxalt in all of the polls. And the ones that favor the Democratic Party, when you apply the mean reverted bias as we did in today's video, we found that the lead there was either non-existent or barely a lead of 1, at most 2 points. Realistically, Nevada is a very close race, and I think Laxalt might actually take it away, especially considering how close it was back in 2020. It definitely could also surprise me, that's why it's tilt, and go back to the Democratic column, but at this point I think Laxalt might have the upper hand across the state of Nevada. And looking at the 538 characterization, it's about tied here, a slight advantage for Cortez Masto. But unfortunately for her, I do think Adam Laxalt will pull out ahead by the end of the map. But for the state of Arizona, I don't think the Democratic Party will lose it. And this is where I've really had much internal conflicts thinking about these races, thinking about the characterizations that they have. Because I never thought that Arizona and Georgia and Pennsylvania would vote to the left of Nevada in the 2022 Senate races. If you jumped back to 2016, it was a flipped scenario. The Democratic Party didn't control Pennsylvania. They didn't control Georgia. They didn't control Arizona. And they don't control Pennsylvania right now. But the eventual winner is very different than where it was back in 2016. And it's an exact flip in the state of Nevada as well. By the end of this election cycle, I think we will end up with a very similar map to what we have right now. It's been pretty much 50-50 for the past couple of election predictions. Not by choice, or I guess obviously it is me choosing where these states go. But I think this is honestly where they stand at this point. You take a look at the data. You take a look at the favorability ratings. You take a look at everything that is gaugeable, and you find a map very similar to this one. The 538 forecast also shows us a very similar map. Democrats and Republicans practically have an equal chance at maintaining or winning control of the U.S. Senate. And when you take a look at this map, you don't really find yourself in a position where the map changes too heavily. It's close when it comes down to the 50-50. Republicans are supposed to have the upper hand right now, but I don't necessarily know if I buy that. It is possible, though, that Democrats do lose control of the Senate. Absolutely. These races are exceptionally close. Democrats do lose Nevada, but they pick up Pennsylvania, so it cancels out. The rest of the states practically say the same. So we end up in the Democrats and the Republicans, worst nightmare, at a 50-50 Senate map continued for 2 more years through Biden's first term, which will be a very interesting time to govern, especially if the House goes red. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.